The bathroom mirror was fogged up from my shower, and I couldn't resist. My finger traced a little hard on the steam. Giggling, I quickly wiped it away, a ridiculous grin spreading across my face. I hadn't felt this lighthearted in, well, I wasn't sure how long. Something shifted in me as I got ready for work. Maybe it was that dumb heart on the mirror. I slid my wedding ring off, letting it spin on my finger. The cool bareness of my skin felt strange, but thrilling too. Like I was shedding a weight I didn't know I'd been carrying. I tucked the ring back on before I could think too hard about it, but the sensation lingered. He's overreacting. Like, seriously, I complained to Sarah over our lattes. Our Thursday ritual. Just because I get a text sometimes. It's probably work stuff, he shouldn't jump to conclusions. Maybe, Sarah said, but she didn't look totally convinced. I rolled my eyes. Honestly, sometimes I wondered if she thrived on the drama more than I did. Still, a little flicker of doubt poked at me. Did I sound too defensive? Was it obvious I was hiding something? Later that day, fixing my hair in the office bathroom, I felt his eyes on me when I reached for my phone. The familiar crease appeared in his brow, that look of worry that was starting to grate on my nerves. Whoa, what? My laugh was a little too sharp. Can't I have a little privacy? But his face stayed tight, and I fumbled for an excuse. Gotta run, sorry. I grabbed my bag and practically fled the office. In my pocket, my fingers traced the crumpled paper. The little cafe, tucked away on a street he'd never suspect. I had to meet him there soon. I'd never done anything like this, not really. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. Was that guilt, or anticipation? Honestly, I wasn't sure anymore, and in a twisted way, I didn't want to be. The unknown, the thrill of it, it felt intoxicating after so long in the same, predictable routine. That night, his scent clung to my pillow stronger than it ever had. I lay there, my stomach churning. I tried to convince myself it was just laundry day, something changed in the wash, but it was his cologne, amplified in the quiet of the night. The guilt was a weight on my chest, but underneath, a flicker of something else. Was it desire I felt, or just the thrill of being caught? The next day with my brother, Mark, was agony. Every time I thought about the cafe, about meeting him there, Mark's offhand comment would bounce around my skull. Someone's got a crush, he'd said, and his smirk was back when I met his eyes over lunch. Shut up, I mumbled through a forced smile, my cheeks burning. He laughed, and I tried to steer the conversation towards safer topics, but the damage was done. Did he know? Could he tell something was up? The lies came easier now, almost automatic. Late meeting, I told my husband when I came home 2 hours after I was supposed to. His nod was clipped, tight. The phone in my pocket vibrated. I pretended not to notice, but my hand twitched towards it, itching to check the coded message that waited there. I had to get a hold of myself. This thing with, well, whoever he was, it was getting sloppy. Walking home, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a darkened window. My eyes looked brighter, my cheeks flushed. Was this happiness? The word felt wrong, like a lie in itself. I couldn't kid myself anymore. It was the deception, the wrongness of it all, that made me. Was it radiant? He thought I was glowing, and he was so far off the mark. Later, in the kitchen, his fingers brushed mine. Accidental, like always, but it was like lightning through my veins. The guilt, and the twisted rush of sneaking around, wrestled inside me. I pulled my hand away quickly. He said nothing, but his eyes lingered on mine for a beat too long. Did he know, or was I just projecting my own paranoia onto him? It was maddening. I couldn't take it anymore. The lies were choking me. So, I put on the red dress. The one I bought, the one he'd never even noticed. The defiance felt good, a flicker of something that wasn't guilt or shame. Looking at myself in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. Was this the woman who was sneaking around, lying through her teeth? I felt powerful. That buzz in my pocket, the one reserved for him. My fingers shook as I reached for it. Can't sleep. You? It read. It wasn't even midnight, and already he was pushing. It was too much sometimes, how demanding he could be. Me neither, I typed, the words coming automatically. I tucked the phone away, a familiar tightness coiling in my chest. I knew this had to stop. Soon. He was always more present in my dreams now. His laughter in place of my husband's gentle snore, his hands where they shouldn't be. When I woke up, it was with a jolt, a mix of longing and dread washing over me. The next morning, my husband was in the garage, staring at our bikes. The ones we'd bought with such excitement, imagining long rides together. They were collecting dust now. Hey, I trailed off. He didn't look at me. When he finally did, the hurt in his eyes made my heart twist uncomfortably. Wanna, go for a ride this weekend? His voice was tentative, hopeful. It should have made my resolve stronger. Instead, it felt like a trap. Sure, I said, the lie a bitter pill on my tongue. Because I knew exactly what I'd be doing that weekend instead. And this time, the guilt stabbed at me with a force I hadn't expected. I started making excuses. To myself, to my husband, to anyone who'd listen. I need to run a quick errand, or, I have a work thing downtown. And then I'd be at the cafe, sitting at our usual table, waiting for him to walk through the door. Our conversations were electrifying. It wasn't just the secrecy, although that definitely fueled it. There was a way he looked at me, listened to me, like I was the most interesting person in the world. I was starting to forget how that felt with my husband. The lies were getting easier. Like a muscle, the more I used it, the stronger it got. But easier didn't mean guilt-free. The lies slithered around my heart, tighter and tighter with each one. Still, I couldn't stop. He was becoming. Well, I didn't like the word addiction, but I was starting to see how it could happen. Dinner with my mom was a disaster waiting to happen. Something's different about you, darling, she said, studying me over her wine glass. A bead of sweat rolled down my temple. Different how? My laugh sounded too high, too fake, even to my own ears. Happier, I think, she mused, and I couldn't meet her gaze. Because she was right, in a twisted, wrong kind of way. And that guilt, the one that felt like constant motion sickness, it was starting to fade. The receipt in his pocket was like a bomb going off. A tiny, crumpled bomb in his jeans. The place was swanky, somewhere we could never afford, and definitely somewhere we'd never been together. My heart pounded in my ears. What the hell was he hiding? Was he? No, I wouldn't even let my mind finish the thought. But the seed of doubt was planted. That night, lying in bed next to him, was different. When he rolled over, his hand brushing mine, it used to feel like comfort, like home. Now, it made my skin crawl. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how quickly things had changed. And wondering what came next, how long until it all came crashing down. His smiles had gone brittle. The warmth in his eyes was slowly fading, replaced by something cold and distant. It was like a mirror shattering. I could see the pieces, the change, but I couldn't face what it meant. He was onto me. I knew it with the same gut-wrenching certainty I knew I couldn't stop seeing the other guy. One night, after my husband fell asleep, something twisted inside me snapped. I had to know. It was pure desperation, a reckless lunge towards the answer I was terrified of. His phone. I knew it was wrong, but I slid it from his nightstand anyway. My fingers trembled as I navigated menus, looking for anything, a clue, a name, anything that confirmed what my heart already knew. Nothing. Then it struck me, voicemail. There was one unread message. I pressed play, holding my breath. A woman's voice, low and soft. Not mine. Can't wait to see you, she breathed. I fumbled, deleting the message, every second an agonizing stretch of time. He stirred beside me, and I froze, shoving the phone under the duvet just as his eyes fluttered open. You okay? He mumbled, the sleep slurring his words. Fine, just bad dream, I lied, my voice thin and unconvincing. My lover was different too. His touch felt demanding, no longer thrilling. The secrecy that once fueled our liaisons now felt suffocating. And with the thrill gone, the guilt was louder than ever. Yet, I kept going back. Like I was on autopilot, unable to stop the inevitable crash I knew was coming. Then, he left work early. A surprise. My heart slammed into my ribs. Frantically, I erased messages, swept away any crumbs of evidence that would betray me. Just as I stuffed the last incriminating note into my pocket, the front door creaked open. I didn't know what I'd say, what lies I could spin. Instead, I found myself frozen in place, a deer caught in headlights. He didn't yell, didn't even raise his voice more than a few notches. Instead, he looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes, it was worse than any screaming match. Disappointment, hurt. I felt like I was shrinking in front of him. The lies came tumbling out of my mouth. Excuses, deflections, half-truths twisting in the air between us. Useless. He saw right through me. Each word I uttered was like another nail in the coffin of our marriage. We fought then, voices ragged, bouncing off the walls of our once happy home. The truth came out, spilling like poison. Every detail felt like a knife I was twisting into both of us. When it was finally over, there was just silence. A hollow, echoing silence that screamed louder than the fight itself. I don't even remember what he said, only that he looked so tired, so broken. It made the guilt a physical thing, lodged in my throat. The phone call to my sister-in-law was a desperate grasp for comfort. Her voice was soft, laced with pity, not the anger I expected, and that just made it worse. I always knew, she whispered. Always knew? Everyone knew but me? The shame burned. For some reason I couldn't fathom, I found myself seeking out my dad. The man who had barely spoken to me in years since other bad choices I'd made. But there I was, on his doorstep, my whole world in shambles. He didn't say much, just listened, offered tea I couldn't drink. His quiet understanding felt more damning than any judgment. Sleep? Forget it. My mind was a hamster wheel of questions, of self-hate. Was this thrill, this addiction to someone new, the only way I could shake the dullness out of my life? Was the cost, my whole marriage, ever going to feel worth it? The answers didn't come. Only the harsh truth that I had built this, choice by painful choice. And now I'd have to live with the consequences. It wasn't a surprise, exactly. But seeing it, the word, divorce, printed in that soulless official font, hit me like a gut punch. My legs gave out, and I sank onto the kitchen chair, the paper crumpling in my trembling hand. This was real. The life I knew, for all its flaws, was shattering beyond repair. The man who was once my thrill, my secret, wouldn't let it go easy. His calls started as whimpers, then grew into pathetic begs. Finally, the accusation. This is your fault. He screamed it down the line, his voice barely recognizable. The glow of excitement had long faded from him. In its place, I saw his weakness. His desperation. It wasn't attractive. But somewhere, buried under the wreckage, I felt a different kind of pain. It wasn't for him, but for us. For what my husband and I once shared. All those plans, the whispered dreams at night. Was it all a lie? Had it all been so fragile? My throat tightened, a sob building. The courtroom was a blur of sterile walls and legalese. Across the aisle, I saw him. He looked smaller somehow, older. We didn't speak. Didn't need to. The chasm between us was wider than any ocean. The judge's gavel brought a strange sort of relief. Finality. My best friend. Well, I couldn't blame her for turning away. Sarah, who knew me inside and out, who held me when boys in high school broke my heart. She couldn't look at me without a mix of disgust and sorrow. I couldn't blame her, not really. Just another casualty in this mess I had made. Some nights, I let myself cry. Not for my lover, he was a ghost now. Not even for my marriage. There was nothing left to mourn there. But for the life I thought I wanted, the future I envisioned. I mourned the woman I thought I was, the woman he thought I was. That woman was gone. In her place, I wasn't sure yet who would emerge from the ashes. The encounter was so random it almost felt like a sign. There I was, in line at the post office, when a familiar voice called my name. Mrs. Evans, my high school English teacher. We'd always gotten along, but it had been, almost 15 years. So, dear, she said, peering at me over half-moon glasses, what are you up to these days? Her eyes were kind, not judging. And that's when I spilled it all. The affair, the divorce, the crushing sense of worthlessness. Somehow, it was easier with her, a stranger now. Maybe because I knew she hadn't seen me, hadn't loved me, before all this. To my surprise, she didn't gasp or scold. We all rebuild, she said gently. Sometimes, we have to tear things down to the studs first. I choked out a laugh. Was that a building metaphor or a confession of her own? It didn't matter. Just hearing it out loud made it feel less catastrophic. The red dress hung in my closet like a taunt. I took it down, stared at my reflection. The woman in that dress, the one hungry for excitement? Danger? She wasn't me anymore. Or maybe, she was a part of me I had buried too deep. Donating it to charity felt like an exorcism. Watching him pack was agonizing. Each sock, each folded shirt, was a chip off the wall between us. I wanted to scream, stop. But what was there left to fight for? Promises? Love? All gone. Ash in the fireplace of my own making. The car door slammed. I stood on that empty doorstep and felt the finality of it wash over me like cold rain. We hadn't spoken a word. Didn't need to. The empty half of the garage was more eloquent than any goodbye could ever be. The house. It wasn't a home anymore. Just a big, silent place full of ghosts. I sat there, in the quiet of our failed togetherness. But among the echoes, a question flickered. Okay, so this was the rubble of my life. What would I build from it? Who would I build from it? The answers wouldn't come easy. But, for the first time in a long time, there was a tiny glimmer where the despair used to be. Maybe, just maybe, some things could be rebuilt stronger. I hated therapy at first. All that forced digging into emotions felt more like ripping open an unhealed wound. Plus, the therapist, Dr. Lewis, with his wire-rimmed glasses and calm voice, made me vaguely suspicious. Like he could see right through me, all the stupid choices I'd made. But after a few tear-filled sessions, something shifted. It became a place I could fling around anger, messy guilt, and even pinpricks of hope, without judgment. Those tangled emotions started to feel less like monsters and more like puzzle pieces I just didn't know how to put back together yet. One afternoon, I walked past the dusty bikes in the garage. They had turned into symbols of a life abandoned, of promises broken. I hesitated, then grabbed a rag and started polishing the chrome. My reflection looked back at me, blurry through the dust. Was that the woman I wanted to be? The one who gave up? Mark's text made me smile. A simple, "Here when you need me," had more weight than 1,000 fancy words ever could. Maybe trust wasn't entirely shattered. Maybe it could heal, scar tissue and all. My friends took some coaxing. At first, our outings felt forced, laughter tinged with awkwardness. But as the weeks passed, something genuine started to shine through. Their concern was real. Their jokes made me forget the mess for precious minutes at a time. I'd forgotten what it felt like to just be with people who knew me, flaws and all, and still cared. Taking care of myself was the hardest. Baths felt indulgent. Reading a book was an extravagance when there were dishes to do, a house to fix up. But one evening I found myself lighting a candle, the fancy one I'd never used, and sinking into the tub. It felt strange at first, but a quiet calm settled over me. Taking care of myself. Maybe that wasn't selfish. Maybe it was the first wobbly step on the long, hard road to getting back to feeling like a whole person, not just the wreckage of one. Volunteering wasn't my idea of a good time. It was Mark's doing. Get out of your head, he'd nudged. And before I could blink, he'd signed me up at the local food bank. The first day was awkward. I felt like a fraud. Here I was, sorting canned goods and bagging rice, when my own life was in shambles. But watching other people struggle, people with real problems, shifted something in me. Their resilience in the face of hardship made my self-pity seem small. The apology letters were Dr. Lewis' idea. He said it wasn't about getting closure for the other person, but about clearing space in myself. So I wrote them. To my ex-husband, full of the remorse I should have felt earlier. To my parents, my friends, to my old self. Some letters ended up crumpled in the trash. Others felt cleansing to mail. Whether the recipients would ever forgive me was irrelevant. It was about starting to forgive myself. My wedding ring still sat in its box on my dresser. It was the weight of 1,000 bad decisions. Sometimes I'd pick it up, rolling it between my fingers. Then I'd put it back. Was it a reminder of failure, or a symbol of survival? I wasn't sure yet. On the bus the other day, this guy across from me smiled. Not a creepy smile, just, nice. And, just for a second, I smiled back. It felt rusty, that muscle, like it hadn't been used in ages. But then I remembered laughing with friends, real laughter, just a few weeks ago. Maybe those tiny flickers of joy were getting stronger, slowly but surely. In the bathroom mirror, the bags under my eyes were still there, the lines etched a bit deeper. This face had seen more pain than I ever imagined. But there was a spark in the eyes now, a defiance even. This woman, I wasn't sure who she was becoming. But she was stronger than the woman who'd broken everything apart, that much I knew. And stronger meant a whole world of possibilities I hadn't allowed myself to see in a long